Hello and welcome. We're doing some painting today just for some practice. I'm starting with my Arches cold press paper. This is cut down from a larger sheet and actually has artwork on the back of it, really old artwork. Then I'm just going to reuse the sheet, so I'm not wasting it. There definitely is a right side and wrong side to watercolor paper. There's a front and the back. On this particular paper, because of what a high relief it has, I don't mind painting on the back of it. Sometimes I absolutely hate painting on the back of watercolor paper, but the Arches is quite a nice paper, so I don't mind it. I'm practicing a specific type of flower today, a 5-petal that I've been playing around with for a while now. So I'm going to be using that particular flower shape that we did a little bit last week, but we're going to explore it a little bit more and use some different colors. So as always, I'm going to start with my basic circles just to give myself some perspective to work with. And some center points to paint from. I'm going to keep my pencil marks fairly light. Anything that is under a paler color of watercolor is not going to show, or I'm sorry, not going to erase. I'm writing and thinking at the same time. Dangerous. So I want to make sure I don't make my circles super dark. All right, we're gonna prep our watercolor palette. First thing I'm going to do is dump out the cat fur. Because that's what happens when you live with a cat. I'm gonna do some reds today. I'm thinking some darker, browner burgundies with some yellows. A lot of people think of springtime as a lot of pastels. I tend to think of them as a lot of yellows and blues. I think probably because the first flower we get here in Pennsylvania is forsythia, which is a very bright yellow, and it just sprouts like a weed absolutely everywhere. So I tend to think of springtime with that kind of a marigoldish and buttercup yellow. Not a pastel buttercup, but like a nice solid medium yellow. So I'm gonna mix up some colors here, and I do have my swatch. Start mixing some up, and I'm also going to be pulling out my secondary palette from Letter Sparrow because I really like her ochre, and I'm going to use some of her ochre, her burnt sienna, and the Maya blue down here, maybe some green. Her paints are really lovely, super highly pigmented, and I really enjoy how smooth they are. So we're going to keep that guy handy as well. All right, so the paintbrushes I'm going to be using today are going to be my usual Roundup. These are my favorite right now. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I kind of do oscillate a little bit. These are my current favorites. These are Raphael's and Black Velvets. So top one's a soft aqua Raphael. The bottom two are a silver black velvet in 10, 8, and 18. I've got a few other brushes here with me today that maybe I'll get into. I've got two white sables in a 6 and a 12 by Robert Simmons. And of course, my go-to, other than my black velvets, are always gonna be my Princetons. So I've got a whole bunch of Princetons over here that we can hop into if we feel like it. All right, so I'm gonna mix up some reds and some yellows. I have been using like a purple lake and a rose lately. We're gonna get into some of the darker reds today. I'm probably gonna hit up some purple as well. Goodness, I have not touched this purple in so long. Purple is definitely not a color I tend to gravitate towards at all. I have gotten better over the years at using colors that I'm unfamiliar with or uncomfortable with, or just colors that I don't particularly care for. And purple is kind of in that family. Picking up some blacks and some browns in there as well, just to make us a little darker. Swatching that out, that is like a nice, it's kind of a blood color there. Do a little bit of some blues in here as well. I have an indigo and a Prussian I'm mixing in between. I'm also going to mix in some black with those as well. I'm going to try and clean out this one. This is a French ultramarine that I just need to clean out and replace. So I'll try to use some of that today. Bringing in some of that black. Definitely want some nice dark colors today. Now let's swatch that guy. As always, swatching between colors and water, because I also want to see how my colors run, since that's the best part. Pulling some ochre in from my letter sparrow and some of that burnt sienna. And some from my palette, since I do have some red in there and I want to kind of pull that in. Oh, love, love, love these colors. Gonna do some straight ochre as well, just for some nice bright forsythia yellow. And we'll get some green going in here too. Seriously, the green from Letter Sparrow is so smooth, I really love it. All right, so there's our palette for the day. I think I am going to add a little bit more red to this bad boy here. All right, let's get painting. I do tend to keep my desk pretty clean, so I'm going to pull out these brushes that I know I'm not going to use. Set those guys aside. I will probably pull out a small one in a little bit for the center of our flowers, but until then, I'm going to leave it to the side. So the next thing I'm going to do is kind of color plan mentally just a little bit. I do want my focal color to be that reddish color. So we're gonna start with our flowers in that red, and then our leaf color, we're gonna start with the light blue and the light green and work those in together. And I do wanna know that because I'm going to paint those leaves in with my petals as I go, so that I get some of that color to run together. So what I'm working on, especially here, is I talk a lot about editing editing our work as artists, editing our work as painters, as business owners, as creatives. And what I mean by that is actually to take observation of your work and note the things about it that you really, really love. About maybe a week or two ago, I did a painting of monochromatic black and white flowers, and there was just this one flower that I really, really loved. So instead of saying, oh, that's such a great painting, I wish I could do more like that, what I do is I sit there with it above my desk and I really pay attention to what I love about it, and I make notes to myself, I think about it, I review it, and then I try and duplicate that thing that I love so much. So that's what I'm doing today. Some of the things that I really loved about that piece were that the petals were created with 3 brush strokes instead of 2. That is something I do fairly often, but there was something about it that just had this really, really lovely movement that I am going to try and recreate. And I find the best way to try and recreate something is just to do it over and over again. So I'm going to do the entire page of this style of flowers and see what it takes to get that style to come back again. Remove the dog hair. And the other thing of note in that other flower were the negative spaces. So I want to make sure that I do leave those negative spaces as well. We are going to add some leaves in here at the same time so we can get a little bit of that bleed in. I do know that this straight green is not going to make me happy. I never use just a straight up green, and I should have mixed it beforehand, so I just gave my green a little bit of a daub of red. And we'll mix in a little bit of the brighter green just to kind of give us that spring feel that we're going with. But definitely want to mute up our green a little bit, and obviously, well, if you're newer to painting, this might not be obvious. Red is a complement to green, so if you ever want to dull up a color, you could do something like add a brown to it, but the correct way of doing it is actually to add its complement, and that muddies it up a little bit. And sometimes we need it a little bit muddier, and it's going to come out of the palette naturally. I also feel that the straight up green from the palette is not going to be very natural green. So if you're going for a more natural look and feel for your florals or for your project, giving that a little bit of its complement is going to be much more how we see things in nature. So this green is going to be a lot more accurate for what we see with our eyes. guys hear the dog in the background? That is the Mun dog, the Monday girl. So here's that intentional bleed that I was talking about earlier. That is my absolute favorite thing about watercolor. And sometimes when my paints have dried a little bit too much and I'm not getting that bleed, or if I'm not close enough, I will definitely add that in, which we can do real quick as an example. Helps if your paint is actually wet, which mine have dried rather quickly. thing I find interesting about the art world in general, especially with new creatives, is that so often new artists or young artists don't think of the possibility of creating their own distinctive style having to do with their color palette. And I think that's a really big missed opportunity for a lot of artists, especially when they're just starting out, that the colors you are most drawn to, the tones, the combinations can also become your signature. Some of my favorite watercolor artists are incredibly distinctive, not only in their style and how they see the world, but in the colors they choose to use. If there are colors that you enjoy using, don't shy away from that. Instead, I would encourage you to lean into it. There are colors that I absolutely cannot stand using. Phthalo green, can't stand it. Absolutely hate it. So I just don't use it, and that's okay too. So if there's colors that you love using, if there's combinations you love using, like I happen to really love red and green together because I like the way they behave and the colors they turn when they run. Any of those things can become your signature just as easily as a style or a point of view. All right, so far our tones here are pretty dark. This looks like it's going to the fall direction, but we are gonna bring in some springtime here with some of our accents. So our yellows, for sure. And we're gonna bring in some blues. Of course, the blues are gonna be a little on the dark side, but that's okay. Because I do like things a little moody sometimes. Alright, so here's our base. This is just our first layer down. In our first layer, I'm always going to do our back level of greenery. So usually what's going to be the lightest in my overall painting. I do have some nice bleeds here, and this one's just fantastic. Wait for these guys to dry. Once our flowers are dried, we'll go in and add our centers where we can add some visual weight. I'll do a few more layers of the leaves. So the next thing I'm going to do is going to be some of my yellows. I'm going to alternate between some of my darker yellows and some of my brighter yellows. I'm going to just add a little bit of water to what I had mixed up over here. And we're going to add in some yellow. So because I always think of forsythia at the beginning of spring, this is going to be kind of a forsythia looking flower. The first places I'm going to add it are the places where my flowers are still wet. So I get a little bit of that bleed that I love. My first layer down is going to be a little bit water heavy, and then I'm going to go in and add some color with a little bit more saturation to it so that I get some depth. And then once these are dry, I'll go in and add my stems that will make them look like an actual flower. One thing with flowers like this that you do need to be a little bit cautious of is your directionality. So if I had this one going this way, 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 everything would have a very distinctive directional motion. And that's gonna look really bizarre for your final piece, because that will take your eye with it as it moves over your piece, which is definitely not what we're going for. So then I'm going to take some of the more concentrated color and just dip it in there a little bit to give us some depth. Making sure to vary my directionality. Take this guy a little that direction. And you can definitely hear the dog snoring in the background. The next layer of green leaves I'm going to add are going to be a little bit less muted. So I'm going to bring in a little bit more of a truer green for our next layer. And I always like to layer my leaves kind of right on top of each other. And this is again going to bring a little bit more of a spring feel to the overall as we bring in a little bit less muted, less of a fall feeling to our leaves. And because this is going to be my top layer, I'm going to make sure I keep my floral stems nice and delicate, because I don't want fat stems. And I am going to keep a little bit of red on the side so I can get a little bit of red in here too, just to blend them together. But my base green is going to be much more on the spring side for this next layer. I think layering leaves like this is a really great way of getting some dimensionality and some depth to paintings, especially florals, where it's like, how many ways is there to paint a flower, for goodness sake? You know, we want to make sure that there's lots of ways to paint a floral. Otherwise, our work will look like everyone else's. So we've talked about this before. We've talked about it with Design House Prep School, the school we launched 5 or 6 years ago on how to run a creative business, how to be a stationer, and it has tons and tons and tons of courses on how to run a business. But we talk a lot about how to set ourselves apart in a saturated market. And I feel like the watercolor market, the wedding market, is definitely what you would call saturated. So the first way to set yourself apart in a saturated market is price, is to lower your prices. And we see a lot of this on platforms like Etsy, where the only way to be heard in a room that crowded is to be the cheapest. And it's a business theory and a business practice that I am adamantly opposed to. I know what my worth is, and I know that lowering prices is maybe going to help me get some more work or some more exposure or more projects, but in the long run it's not actually going to help me make any more money. And since I am first and foremost a business owner, that is a problem. So the second way you can compete is by offering a unique product, offering something that no one else can compete with you on. And a really great way of doing that is by having a unique style and by offering something that isn't easily duplicated or copied. And the best way of figuring that out is by practicing and coming up with a style that is uniquely your own. And by doing so, you have less competition. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you practice. You do things over and over again. You focus on your color palette. You focus on how you see things. You stop looking at other artists. You stop comparing yourself to other people. And you practice just for yourself. I mean, I say that like my florals are completely unique. Let's be real, they're not. They're flowers. But what I do with them gets to be more and more unique the more you know my work. If you're new to my YouTube, I've just recently started reposting here. I've been on Instagram for a really long time and just needed a change of scenery a little bit. So we started posting again on our YouTube. But I am first and foremost a stationer, wedding stationer. I do wedding stationery. And how my work is set apart is that, yeah, sure, I'm a watercolor artist, I'm a calligrapher, but it's the combination of those things and what I do with it that makes my work as unique as it is. I tend to spend a lot of time learning about sourcing, about what's on the market, what's available, how to use those things, how to use different types of paper, different types of mediums, different types of printing, different combinations of all of those different things to offer a unique product to my client. And the more I know about those things, the more I know what's on the market, what's available, what can be done, what cannot be done, the more interesting my work can be. And I think that's something that's really important that people tend to not pay enough attention to, is what makes your work interesting, because the answer is not always going to be, well, I have a unique style. What else is there? Because watercolor is ubiquitous enough these days that, you know, it's all kind of starting to look the same. So what do you offer that's different? How do you offer it that's different? And offering a thing like a luxury experience on a shoestring budget, by the way, is not unique. That's lowering your price and competing in a market by being the cheapest. That's not what we're talking about here. So if you answer that question as how are you unique, and you say, I give my clients an unbelievable experience, and you're somewhere in the mid-range price-wise, and you should know exactly where you are price-wise, then that's not unique at all. That's just underselling yourself. If you're going to give your client a unique experience, you need to have the value there, but you also need to charge accordingly. Because the more time you spend with a client and the more luxury and experience you give them, the less money you're making. Because you also have to look at it like an hourly rate. So if you spend 40 hours on a client doing design work for them, but you're only charging $2,000, you need to do that math and figure out how much you're actually making. And once you've looked at that, you will realize that you're competing on price, not on service. And when you start competing on price, that's when you start losing money. So it's perfectly fine to want to offer a luxury experience. I mean, we do around here, but we also charge accordingly. And clients come to us because we offer something unique and different. And we have a really distinctive style and a pretty distinctive way of assembling things and combining products together and combining printing, and that's what makes us unique. We don't compete on price. So what we do want to avoid is we want to avoid a client coming to us and going somewhere else and price shopping. That's a really good indicator that you're being sought after because of your price, not because of your value. And the other thing you will find when you are being sought after because of your price is that clients tend to trust your judgment more. They value your opinion higher. They trust your process. They don't question you as much. They trust your professionalism and your experience. And those are the clients that we really love working with. Ones that let us do our thing because we are very good at our jobs, and we've spent a lot of time getting very good at our jobs. However, the opposite is also true. Trying to do that with no experience is also going to shoot you in the foot, because you don't know what you don't know. And anybody who's accustomed to any type of luxury service will see through that in a hot second. Which no one likes to hear, but that is unfortunately the case. You know, I equate it to shopping at Neiman Marcus versus Saks, or I'm sorry, Saks versus like a Macy's. A Neiman's or a Saks versus a Macy's is if you are a salesperson at a Macy's and you try and go work at a luxury end store, department store like a Neiman Marcus, it's going to be really obvious that you've never worked in luxury before. You don't know the lingo, you don't know the dress code, you don't know a lot of those things that somebody who's in that world has been around and been trained in, which of course you don't. Like, there's no reason for you to know those things, but your clientele will tell the difference. So if you want to move into a high-end market, you need to know what a high-end market is looking for, how they shop, what they're shopping for, how they want to be treated. Because without that knowledge, you'll end up with imposter syndrome or carrying yourself in a way where you look desperate, or you come across as desperate instead of polished and professional and experienced. And those are all things we want to avoid. I actually had an experience recently where I got a little bit of imposter syndrome, something I haven't felt in a really long time. But this year has been hard on everybody, right? And I found myself struggling with it. Caught myself, but definitely felt it, where I had a really sizable project come to me, and when I quoted it out according to what my prices are and what they've always been, I went, oh my goodness, when I looked at the total, like I can't send that to them, like that's way too much. I have to lower this down or something. Side note, these are totally too fat. Nope, they're there to stay, that's fine. But then I caught myself as I was thinking that, like, oh my goodness, like I can't say this to the client, like this is an insane price. And I said, no, I know exactly what I'm worth. I know how long this is going to take me because I've timed myself. I know what my hourly rate is, and this is what they want. If they can't afford that, or if they don't want to pay that, hopefully they give me the chance to have a conversation about it. But generally speaking, I know exactly what it's worth. And as a professional, I'm not going to change my pricing because it scares me. I'm going to understand where that pricing came from, take a step back and say, no, I know what it's worth. And that's exactly what I did. All right, so from here, let's take a look at what we've got going on. We don't have any of our blue yet. That's going to be a secondary flower type. I think we could have a little bit of more of a bright yellow. Maybe we'll add in a few bright yellows, but let's do some blue. I'm going to grab a different brush. I'm going to grab my long round, my Princeton. It's number 8. I'm going to swatch my blue real quick. Nice and dark, excellent. This is getting a little bit moodier and moodier, isn't it? Isn't it fantastic? Actually, I'm going to do some bright flowers first. I just changed my mind. So our bright flowers, our nice bright yellows, will go with our blues. These two together. think I'm just gonna do some like daisy looking flowers, just kind of peeking out from behind all my other ones. And I will probably do some like Black-Eyed Susan centers to these. Some lovely sirens going by there. All right, it's springing up a little bit, isn't it? All right, let's get some of our dark blues in here. I'm actually not sure how I'm feeling about this color palette, but one of our rules is never stop. Even if I don't like the way it's going, gotta keep going. Because usually when you're working on a painting and you get up and walk away, it feels better when you come back. All right, I want to overlap some of these blues in with my dark greens. Really give it some nice depth. Another note about always finishing your pieces is you're never going to know what about a piece you like or dislike until you finish it. Even if you're not loving the color combination or you're not loving the particular flower form, there will always be something to learn from it or to gain from it, even if it's what not to do. So always finish. Like, I cannot imagine liking this after I walked away, but you never know. Put my hand in some yellow. Alright, we have a few small details we need to do. We need to do the center of all of our flowers. I'm going to go in with the same dark blue I've been using. I am taking care to paint the centers in the same direction as the blooms are going. So making sure that I'm paying attention to which way the petals are facing. I'm remembering why I usually limit my paintings to 1 or 2 colors. I'm so not a colorful person. The other thing I've noticed that affects my paintings and affects how I feel about them is the paper I use. Arches is not my favorite, although it's beautiful paper. I love the way it feels. I find that my colors dry a little bit more muted on it, and that's not really what I like. Although I don't particularly like super colorful things, I'm not a big fan of the muted either. I mean, frankly, I just like monochromatic and I'm boring, but that is also going to change your finished piece. So I feel like there's kind of a mixed opinion on what type of supplies you should be using. Some people say always buy the highest quality you can afford to buy. I don't agree with this at all. I just did an interview for a calligraphy magazine that's coming out at the end of the month, and they asked what calligraphy supplies I use. I'm like, you know, I've got a ton of them, but I don't use them. I use the absolute bare minimum because, you know, what's the saying? It's a fool who blames the tools, or only someone who's not professional blames their tools, or whatever that saying is. But I feel the same way about watercolor, about painting in general, about artistry, about creativity, is you need to figure out what works for you. It doesn't matter what brand it is. It doesn't matter where you get it. It doesn't matter how much it costs or how much it doesn't cost. It needs to be something that works for you. And my favorite watercolor paper to use is still Strathmore, which is not expensive. It's ubiquitous. You can find it everywhere. I usually order it in bulk on Amazon, but I'm trying to burn through some of the paper that I already have, and I'm just not loving it. I so prefer my regular old cheap Strathmore paper. All right, I'm gonna go in with black and do the center of my little like black-eyed Susan guys. Let's get that dog hair off my paintbrush there. Can't quite decide if I want to start these in the center of the flower or on the petals. I think it should probably start in the center. What do you think? Okay, so I am not loving this at all. I keep saying that and I keep disliking it more. I like things with a ton of visual differences and a ton of visual weight. So I kind of wish I had done my first layer of leaves a little bit lighter. But one thing I can do that I usually like is going through and adding some detail with a small brush. Making it a little bit darker. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that on some of these. On some of my flowers. I'm gonna add some outlines in here to give myself more weight. And I will probably go through and do it to some of my leaves as well. This is just a nice, rough, loose outline. So while we're sitting here painting, today we've talked about a little bit about imposter syndrome, and we've talked about how to create a unique aesthetic and how that changes your business. But I want to know, for anybody who's lasted this long, down in the comments, if you guys could let me know what you're struggling with in your practice, whether that's running a business, whether that's doing this as a hobby, whether that's doing this as therapy because it's incredibly relaxing. What are you guys struggling with? And what are your thoughts? Do you want to know what this is like to run as a business? Do you wonder if you could turn yours into a business? Are you just frustrated? And what are you frustrated with? Do you feel like you don't improve? Do you feel like other people are better than you? Let me know, and we'll talk about it. Because I guarantee you, everything you're feeling, I have also felt. And I have probably felt in this last year, because it's been a rough one, huh? I do tend to paint at a fairly large scale. I have a really hard time doing small pieces. One thing I regret about doing big pieces is when I'm doing tedious work like this, like the center of the flowers, I get really bored. And it's really easy to just give up and say, oh, I'll come back to it later, and you never do. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is go into my leaves and add some details into my leaves. I'm going to mix up my green a little bit more, make it a smooch darker. By adding some of my red, so it shows up a little better. And I'm not going to do all my leaves, I'm just going to add a little bit of detail to some of them. And I'm probably going to go over some of those stems as well. I do want to make sure that my lines stay on the natural side. So making sure I don't have any nice smooth lines. I want my lines to stay a little bit rough. Otherwise my florals will suddenly have a little bit of a cartoon feel to them. And that's not the look I'm going for. Maybe a nicer way of putting cartoon is illustrated. And that's just not the look we want. And we also want to make sure we keep them thin, which I'm actually struggling with as I pick up cat fur in my brush. Alright, so our depth is kind of coming together here, and I'm liking it a little bit more. So just how we talked earlier about how colors could be your signature look and feel, details like this can be as well. If you like the look of outlining, you can just outline everything. For example. I'm going to do a few more of these leaves and then I'm going to let this dry and see how I'm feeling about it. I do typically like things better as I've let them sit and I come back later and look at them. So we're going to let that happen. But I really would like to hear what you guys are struggling with in your practice. Whether it's creativity or feeling like you're not good enough, comparing yourself to others and feeling like others are better. I would really like to hear what you guys are worried about, what you struggle with, and what your concerns are. And have the opportunity to have that conversation with you and support you in those feelings. The other thing we could do with this painting, speaking of outlines, is we can actually go through and add some leaves that are not painted in. We could add some leaf outlines in here too, just to make it a little bit different. What do you think? Should we do that? Why don't we? I guess one answer for why don't we is because there's not much room in here, huh? I'm going to add a little bit more green into my color I'm using. It's just progressively gotten muddier and muddier. I think here is probably a good place to stop for the day. But go ahead and leave me that comment if you have something you'd like to discuss, or you want someone's take on something or an opinion. So today we covered a few little tips on creating art, creating new art, being unique, setting yourself apart, and a few of those cardinal rules like always finish the work you start, even if you don't like it. Walk away, come back, take a look at it again. If you don't already follow us on Instagram, follow me at Design House of Moira and see all the background and ins and outs of a professional life of a stationer and the things we create for our clients. And always like and subscribe and come back for more. We'll see you guys soon.